I'll sometimes wonder if the blood on my hands will ever completely wash away. It's been 3 years, but when I close my eyes, I still see that moment frozen in time. Her lying on the kitchen floor, eyes wide with surprise. There were no screams, no pleas for mercy, just that silence that finally brought peace after so many years. For the first time in her life, my grandmother was speechless, and I just stood there watching as her power over me drained away along with her life. They called me a monster, but no one ever asked what turned me into one. My name is Matthew. I'm 18 years old, and I just got out of juvenile detention, where I spent the last 3 years of my life. They say I've served my time, but I know that in reality, I'll never stop paying for what I did. Yes, I killed my grandmother. It wasn't an accident, nor a momentary impulse, as I tried to convince the psychologists early on. It was the result of years of something accumulated that grew inside me like a tumor, until there was no more room to contain it. I'm sitting in this empty park now, watching people pass by at a distance, as if they could sense what I did just by looking at me. Maybe they can. They say certain things mark the soul and remain visible in the eyes. If you're watching this, you've probably already formed your opinion about me. The grandson who killed his own grandmother. There's no way to soften that, nor do I want to. I just ask that before you judge me completely, hear my story to the end. The version that reached the news was simple and direct. Teenager kills 67-year-old grandmother after argument. Some more sensationalist channels talked about a brutal murder and speculated about drugs or mental problems. None of them knew the truth. None of them lived a single day in the house where I grew up. I'm not here to seek forgiveness or justify what I did. Nothing justifies taking a life. I'm here because I need to tell my version, not to clear my name, but because during all these years of forced therapy, I learned that keeping this story inside me is like remaining imprisoned, even being technically free. Freedom is a strange concept for me. I was never really free. Not before juvie, not now. Maybe after telling everything, something will change. Maybe not. But if you keep watching, I promise one thing. I'll show how an ordinary person can be pushed beyond the limits we think are impossible to cross. Before continuing, please leave your like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for what I did, but so that stories like mine can serve as a warning, because violence rarely starts from nothing. It has roots, grows slowly, fed by words and silences, until it explodes when no one expects it anymore. And now I'll go back to the beginning, not to the day of the crime, but long before, when I was just a boy who desperately wanted to be loved. My childhood began like any normal child's. I have blurred memories of laughter, hugs, and that feeling of security that only exists when you're too small to understand how the world really works. My parents, Robert and Camille, weren't perfect, but they tried. We lived in a simple house in the suburbs, one of those with a low fence where neighbors know everything about everyone. I was 6 years old when everything changed. One night my father didn't come home. My mother cried for days, then weeks. Later, I would understand that he had run away with another woman, leaving debts and a broken family behind. That's when my paternal grandmother, Miss Irene, really entered our life. I always knew that Tramp wouldn't hold on to my son. Those were her first words when entering our house with her suitcases. I was in the hallway and heard everything. I didn't completely understand what it meant, but I understood enough to know it was something bad about my mother. At first, it even seemed like a solution. My mother needed to work 2 jobs to make up for my father's absence, and my grandmother would take care of me. Miss Irene was a retired teacher, had her own pension, and in theory would be a stabilizing presence. The reality was quite different. The first weeks were of mutual observation. She studied me like someone studying a strange insect. I observed her trying to understand her place in that new family configuration. It soon became clear that she wasn't there to be a loving grandmother. She was there to correct the mistakes that, according to her, my mother had made in my upbringing. Look how he holds that pencil, just like his father, clumsy and without care. Comments like this started to become part of my routine. Small jabs that seemed harmless, but that accumulated like drops of water in a bucket that would one day overflow. As I grew up, the criticisms became more frequent and more direct. If it weren't for you, your father would never have run away. Do you know how much it costs to keep you? Your mother works herself to death while you waste everything. I don't know how I'll make you a real man, but I'll try to fix the damage. My mother was rarely present to witness these interactions. When she arrived at night, exhausted, my voice transformed. Her voice became softer. Her criticisms disappeared. "The boy behaved well today," she would say, even after having spent the whole day humiliating me. I tried to tell my mother a few times. "Grandma said I'm a burden to you." She would respond with exhaustion. "Matthew, your grandmother just wants the best for you. She has a tougher way from the old days, but she helps us a lot. Where would we be without her?" At 10 years old, I understood I was alone in that battle. My mother depended financially and emotionally on my grandmother's presence. Between believing her son or the mother-in-law who generously took us in after the abandonment of her son, the choice seemed obvious. The ironic thing is that my grandmother hated my father for abandoning us, but blamed me for it, as if I were the reason for his escape. At school, I started to isolate myself. Her words echoed in my head constantly. Burden to the family. Waste. Just like your father. When a teacher noticed my withdrawn behavior and called my grandmother to talk, it was the beginning of another level of hell. "So now you're making a little show at school, wanting to call attention from others because you can't get it at home?" She dragged me by the arm to the bedroom and left me there without dinner to learn not to embarrass the family. From then on, I began to live a double life. At school and in front of others, I was the polite boy that Miss Irene, the dedicated grandmother, had raised. At home, I was her emotional punching bag, the receptacle of all the resentment she carried against my father, against my mother, and perhaps against life itself. At 13, I thought about running away from home. I even packed a backpack, put in some clothes and the little money I had saved. But where would I go? I had no other close relatives, no close enough friends to take me in. So I gave up. And the backpack hidden under the bed became another reason for humiliation when my grandmother found it. "Planning to run away like your father. Bad blood really runs in the veins, doesn't it?" She burned the backpack with everything inside in the backyard like a ritual, forcing me to watch. "So you never forget that you have nowhere to go, that no one wants you out there, that you only have us." At 14, my mother got sick. Cancer. The doctor said it was aggressive, one of those that appears when the body is already too exhausted to fight. She died 6 months later. At the wake, my grandmother cried copiously in front of everyone. At home, she looked at me and said, "Now it's just the two of us. God help me bear this cross." My mother's death gave my grandmother total control. There was no one else to question her methods, no one I could turn to. The isolation became almost complete. She controlled my schedules, my friendships, the few I had, even what I ate. You think food falls from the sky? With the measly pension, your mother left barely enough to pay the bills. You should be grateful for every grain of rice on that plate. I tried to seek help a few times. A social worker even came to visit our house after an alert from the school about my increasingly withdrawn behavior. But my grandmother was a master of appearances, the impeccably clean house. Her in her best dress, talking about the challenges of raising a teenager alone after so many family tragedies. The social worker left convinced that I was lucky to have such a dedicated grandmother. That night, after the social worker left, she made me clean the entire house again to learn not to bring strangers to meddle in our life. At 15 years old, something inside me started to change. The sadness and fear gave way to a silent anger that grew every day. I began to notice that my grandmother, despite all her power over me, was aging. Her physical strength diminished. Her hands, once firm when dragging me by the arm, now trembled slightly when serving coffee. For some reason, this perception gave me a strange sense of power, a power I had never felt before. At 15 years old, the dynamic at home began to change in a subtle but significant way. My grandmother still maintained psychological control, but physically, I was growing. I was already a few inches taller than her, and for the first time I noticed a glimmer of something like fear in her eyes when she faced me during our discussions. That's when she adapted her strategy. If she could no longer intimidate me physically, she would intensify the psychological control. She started locking food in the cupboard, rationing meals as a form of punishment. "Those who don't work don't eat right," she would say, even knowing I was still a minor and couldn't work legally. The public humiliations became more frequent. She made a point of diminishing me in front of neighbors, church colleagues she attended, anyone who could witness. "This here is Matthew, son of that no good who abandoned the family. I'm trying to straighten his path, but it's difficult, you know how it is? Blood pulls." And she would give that laugh of hers, that one that seemed scraped from inside her throat while running her hand over my shoulder in a false demonstration of affection. People would smile awkwardly, some would even look at me with pity, others would agree with her, reinforcing that I was very lucky to have such a dedicated grandmother who took me in after so many tragedies. At home, things got worse. She started creating increasingly absurd rules. I had a schedule to use the bathroom. I couldn't open the refrigerator without permission. My room was inspected daily. My clothes were counted. If she suspected I had eaten something without permission, she would make me kneel on corn kernels to learn discipline. There were days when she would enter an almost feverish state of anger, usually triggered by some memory of my father or some bill that arrived. On those days, she would turn the house upside down, looking for proof that I was plotting against her. "I know you stole money from my purse, confess." She would scream even when there was no money missing at all. Once she found a book that a teacher had lent me at school. It was a simple novel, one of those adventure ones for teenagers. She tore it page by page in front of me. "You think I don't know what these communist teachers put in your heads wanting to turn you against me?" I had to pay for the book with the little money I managed to save, doing small jobs for neighbors, of course, without her knowing, because any money I earned, according to her, should be handed over to help with household expenses. At 16 years old, I discovered a secret that would change my understanding of everything. While cleaning the basement, another of the endless tasks she imposed on me, I found a box with old documents, among them, the will of my grandfather, who had died before I was even born. The document revealed that the house where we lived, which my grandmother always claimed was hers by right, actually belonged in part to my father. And by extension, after his abandonment, a part would belong to me when I turned 18. Suddenly, everything made sense. The obsessive control, the fear that I would turn out like my father, the determination to keep me submissive and dependent. It wasn't just resentment or gratuitous malice. There was a very concrete material interest. If I knew my rights, I could claim my part when I came of age. If I became independent, she would lose control not only over me, but potentially over the property. I kept this information to myself, hiding the documents in a safe place outside the house. For the first time, I had a weapon against her, even though I couldn't use it yet. This discovery changed something fundamental inside me. The anger, which before was an emotional response to humiliations, now transformed into something more calculated, colder. I started to observe her with different eyes, no longer as the terrifying authority figure, but as someone who was afraid of me, of what I could become, of what I could claim. My grades at school, which had always been average due to the chaotic environment at home, started to improve. I realized that education could be my way out. If I could get a scholarship, I could leave home earlier. I started studying obsessively, using the school library as a refuge. My grandmother noticed the change, of course. Nothing escaped her eyes. "Now you're staying up late studying. What are you plotting? You think you'll get into college? With what money? Mine won't be." When I mentioned the possibility of scholarships, she laughed in that cruel way, so characteristic of her. "Scholarships are for smart people, not for mediocre ones like you. Your father also had these grandiose ideas, and look where he ended up. I don't even know why you're still in school. You should be working to help at home." She started to deliberately sabotage my studies. She would invent household chores that coincided exactly with my study schedules. She would hide my books. She even tore up an important paper I had spent weeks preparing. "This fell by itself into the wet sink. Accidents happen," she said with a smile at the corner of her mouth. At 17 years old, I started having recurring nightmares. I dreamed I was trapped in a dark well, screaming for help, while hearing her laughter echoing above. I would wake up in a cold sweat with my heart racing. I developed insomnia, spending entire nights staring at the ceiling, planning how I would survive until I turned 18 and could legally leave that house. The isolation was almost complete. Now at school, I barely talked to classmates. Teachers noticed my academic effort, but also my emotional distance. One of them, the history teacher, even called me to talk after noticing burn marks on my arm, the result of another domestic accident orchestrated by her. "Matthew, if something is happening at home, you can tell me. There are agencies that can help." I almost broke down there, almost told everything. But then I remembered the other times I tried to seek help. The social worker who left convinced of my grandmother's dedication. The neighbor who heard screams and called the police only to be convinced it was a normal argument between grandmother and rebellious teenage grandson. "Everything's fine, teacher." I burned myself making coffee, I answered, swallowing the lump in my throat. The teacher didn't insist, but started lending me books. Books about psychology, about overcoming, about adolescent rights. She couldn't tear them all up, so I read them hidden, usually at school. It was in these books that I began to understand what was happening to me. There were terms for that: psychological abuse, gaslighting, social isolation, deliberate sabotage. Understanding the process didn't make it easier to endure, but it gave me a kind of mental framework, a scaffold to organize the chaos that was my emotional life. In the middle of my last year of school, I received news that I had been pre-selected for a full scholarship at a university in another city. It was my chance to escape. I just needed to keep my grades high until the end of the year and pass through an interview. When the letter arrived, I made the mistake of not being able to hide my excitement. She noticed something had changed and started ransacking my room when I was at school. She found the letter. That night, when I got home, she was waiting for me in the living room with the letter torn into pieces scattered on the floor. "So, this was what you were planning behind my back? Running away and abandoning me after everything I've done for you?" "It's not running away, Grandma. It's studying, having a better life, being able to help you later." "Lies!" she screamed, advancing toward me with a fury I hadn't seen in years. "You're just like your father, ungrateful, after everything I sacrificed for you. You think I'll let you go, while I'm alive? You're not leaving this house." It was the first time I didn't back down. Something inside me simply broke. The house isn't even all yours. Half was my father's, and now it's mine by right. I saw Grandpa's will. Her face paled instantly. For a moment, I saw pure terror in her eyes. Then, a rage I had never witnessed before. "You went snooping through my things, you little thief, just like your father. Bad blood." She grabbed the nearest decorative vase and threw it at me. I managed to dodge, but the shards scattered across the floor. "You'll never have anything. Nothing. I'll burn this house down before I let you have an inch of it." The argument continued, escalating. She screamed louder and louder, throwing in my face the sacrifice she supposedly had made. Every cent spent on me. How I had been a burden since I was born. That's when the doorbell rang. It was the neighbors worried about the screams. Instantly, as I had seen happen so many times, she changed. She wiped away fake tears, fixed her hair, and went to answer the door with that rehearsed smile. "Oh my, sorry for the disturbance. We're having a little argument here. You know how teenagers are these days, they don't respect their elders anymore." The neighbors, the Peterson couple, looked at me with that same expression as always, half pity, half judgment. "Everything okay, Miss Irene? We just came to see if everything was all right," said Mr. Peterson. "Everything's perfectly fine. Thanks for the concern. Matthew here is nervous because I didn't let him go to a party, right, Matthew?" All eyes turned to me. It was the perfect moment to tell the truth, to expose everything. But something told me that even if I spoke, it wouldn't help. No one would believe. "That's right," I answered mechanically. After they left, she turned to me with a victorious look. "See? No one will ever believe you against me. I'm a poor elderly grandmother who sacrificed everything for her ungrateful grandson. That night, I couldn't sleep. The anger had transformed into something deeper, more primitive, something that didn't have a name yet, but that grew inside me like a storm forming on the horizon. If you've watched this far, please leave your comment about what you would do in my place. Not to justify what happened next, but to understand if anyone can really put themselves in the situation of having absolutely no way out. Because that's exactly how I felt in the following days, like a cornered animal, with no escape. The university tried to contact me several times, but she intercepted all the calls. When they managed to talk to me at school, I had to make up that I had changed my mind about the scholarship. The history teacher noticed my change in behavior, the empty look, the lack of reaction. He tried to talk to me again, but I had already given up on seeking help. I was alone in that war, and I knew it. What I didn't know yet was that the war was just beginning, and that its worst battle was about to happen. The weeks that followed were of a silent tension that hung over the house like a toxic cloud. My grandmother, now aware that I knew the truth about the house, intensified her surveillance. She wouldn't leave me alone for a minute when she was home. She would hide the phone, collect the mail before I could see it. She even showed up at school to inform them that I was having mental problems and that any communication should go through her. The scholarship was lost, obviously. Without the final interview, without being able to respond to the university's contacts, I was automatically disqualified. That door to freedom closed with a bang that only I could hear. I started planning for when I turned 18, now just a few months away. I knew I would need money to leave home to hire a lawyer to help me with the inheritance issue. I got a part-time job at a grocery store hidden from her. The money was kept with a classmate from school, the only one I trusted minimally, but she found out. Of course, my grandmother had eyes and ears everywhere. One day I came home and found her sitting in the living room holding my work permit that I had hidden under the mattress. Working in secret, planning to run away after everything I've done for you? I didn't answer. There was no energy for another circular argument. I spoke with your supervisor today. Ex-supervisor, actually. I told him you have mental problems, that you steal small amounts, that you're not trustworthy. I felt my blood freeze. You did what? What was necessary, Matthew? You think I'll let you leave like that after everything? This house is mine. Your life is mine. I raised you when no one else wanted you. The house is half mine. It's in the will. She smiled. That smile I hated so much. What will? Do you have any proof of this? That's when I realized. She had found the documents I had hidden. The only concrete proof I had about my rights had disappeared. You burned the will, I said. Not as a question, but as a statement. Old documents catch fire easily, she responded, still smiling, especially when they shouldn't exist in the first place. Something inside me broke at that moment. It wasn't a snap. It wasn't sudden. It was like watching a building implode in slow motion, collapsing floor by floor until it turned to dust. I went up to my room in silence. She interpreted that as a defeat, a surrender. In reality, it was the opposite. It was a decision being formed, a conclusion reaching its final point. In the following days, I entered an almost automatic state. I went to school, came back, did the household chores she ordered, all without complaining, without questioning. She interpreted it as submission when it was just the eye of the hurricane. During this time, I started researching on the school's internet about inheritance rights, about how to obtain second copies of documents, about how to prove that a property had been left in a will, even without the original document. I discovered it would be possible, but would take a long time, would require resources I didn't have, and could only be initiated when I turned 18. There were still almost 2 months until my birthday. 2 months that seemed like an eternity. 2 months in which she could do anything to ensure I never had a chance to claim what was mine by right. That's when Mr. Peterson, the neighbor, approached me on the street as I was coming back from school. Matthew, is everything really okay between you and your grandmother? We hear screams almost every night. For a moment, I thought about telling everything, but his look wasn't one of genuine concern. It was curiosity, maybe even pleasure in meddling in other people's lives. Everything's fine, Mr. Peterson, family stuff. Your grandmother mentioned you've been having problems, in the head, that you've been making up stories, that you think the house is yours. I felt a wave of heat rise through my body. So that was it. She was planting the seed in the neighborhood, preparing the ground for whatever she needed to do with me. The house is partially mine, Mr. Peterson, by inheritance right from my grandfather. He gave a condescending smile. Sure. Your grandmother mentioned you've been having these ideas. Look, son, I don't want to meddle, but respect your grandmother. She's already suffered a lot, lost her son, her daughter-in-law, and now has to take care of you alone. At that moment, I understood the complete game. She was building a narrative where I was the disturbed one, the ungrateful one, the problematic one. If something happened to me, if I were admitted to some psychiatric clinic, for example, no one would question it. It would just be the expected outcome for the poor disturbed boy who gave so much trouble to the poor grandmother. I went back home that day with a sense of urgency I had never felt before. It was no longer just a matter of waiting to turn 18, it was a matter of immediate survival. When I entered, my grandmother was on the phone speaking in a low voice. Upon seeing me, she hung up quickly. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, already imagining the answer. "It's none of your business," she answered dryly. "But since you want to know, I was talking to Dr. Mendez. You have an appointment next week." "What, Dr. Mendez? I'm not sick." She smiled that cold smile again. "He's a specialist. He'll help you with your problems, these ideas you've been having. A psychiatrist." She was planning to have me committed or at least medicated until I became docile enough not to pose a threat to her plans. And by the tone of her voice, by the look of triumph, I understood she already had everything arranged. The doctor was probably already convinced of my supposed condition before even meeting me. The following days were of silent and desperate planning. I researched more about this Dr. Mendez. He was indeed a psychiatrist specializing in personality disorders and schizophrenia. He had a private clinic, but also worked at an institution for young people with mental problems, exactly the kind of place where I could disappear if my grandmother so desired. The appointment was scheduled for the following Monday. I had 5 days to decide what to do, 5 days that defined the rest of my life. On Thursday of that week, 2 days before that fateful night, there was a dinner at the Petersons' house. A dinner to which, surprisingly, we were invited. My grandmother accepted promptly, of course. It was another opportunity to show the world how dedicated she was and how problematic I was. I was forced to go. At the dinner were the Petersons, some other neighbors, and, to my surprise, Dr. Mendez himself. It wasn't a coincidence, of course. Everything had been orchestrated so he could observe me in a social environment before the official appointment. Throughout the dinner, I felt his looks on me, evaluating every movement, every expression. My grandmother was at her best role, the dedicated elderly lady, exhausted from taking care alone of a teenager with problems. "Oh, doctor, I don't know what to do anymore. He has these strange ideas. He thinks the house is his, that I'm hiding documents. I even found notes from him about how he could hurt me. That was a complete lie, a fabrication so absurd I almost choked on my food. But Dr. Mendez just nodded, looking at me with that clinical expression of someone who has already formed their diagnosis. It's common in cases of personality disorder," he commented. "Fabricated stories to justify aggressive behaviors." It was clear now. Monday's appointment wouldn't be an evaluation. It would just be a formality to confirm what he already knew, that I was dangerous, unstable, a threat to my poor grandmother. I tried to defend myself, tried to speak, but every word of mine was interpreted as confirmation of the already established diagnosis. If I denied the accusations, it was denial. If I got irritated, it was latent aggressiveness. If I stayed quiet, it was antisocial behavior. On the way back home, after that humiliating dinner, my grandmother was radiant. "See how easy it is, Matthew? No one will ever believe you against me. Monday, Dr. Mendez will prescribe you some medications. Maybe he'll even think it's best for you to spend some time at his clinic for observation." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, feeling a mix of despair and anger growing inside me. "Because you're just like your father, ungrateful, wanting to take what's mine, and I won't allow it." When we got home, she went straight to her room, visibly satisfied with the night's result. I stayed in the living room, staring into emptiness, feeling I was completely cornered. The next day, Friday, I tried to talk to the history teacher, the only one who had ever shown genuine concern for me. But he had missed class. I thought about looking for the school coordinator, but I remembered my grandmother had already been there, had already planted her seeds of doubt about my mental sanity. I spent the whole day at school in a state of torpor, processing my options, which were practically none. If I ran away, it would only be a matter of time before they found me. I was a minor, had no money, had nowhere to go. If I stayed and went to the appointment on Monday, I would probably end up committed or medicated into submission. When I came back home that afternoon, I made a decision. I would confront my grandmother directly. I would demand that she admit the truth about the house, about the will, about everything. It was naive, I know now, but at that moment it seemed like the only thing to do. She was in the kitchen when I arrived, preparing dinner as if it were just another normal day, as if she wasn't planning to have me committed to a psychiatric clinic in less than 72 hours. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "About what?" she answered without looking at me, continuing to cut vegetables. "About what's happening. About what you told Dr. Mendez, the neighbors, everyone. About the house, the will, everything." She stopped cutting, but remained with her back to me. "There's nothing to talk about. Monday you're going to the appointment, you'll receive the treatment you need, and we'll move forward." "I'm not going to any appointment. I don't need treatment. What I need is the truth." She turned slowly, still holding the kitchen knife. Her look was of pure contempt. "Truth? You want the truth? The truth is you're a burden I've carried for years. The truth is your father was useless who ran away because he couldn't stand you crying all the time, demanding attention. The truth is your mother died of exhaustion because of you, and the truth is this house is mine because I deserve it after everything I've been through. The house is half mine. It's in Grandpa's will. What will? There's no will. And even if there was, do you really think anyone would side with a disturbed teenager against an elderly lady? Do you think anyone would let you have this house after everything I've done for you? I felt something hot and heavy in my chest, a rage so deep it seemed physical. You haven't done anything for me. You tortured me for years, humiliated me, isolated me, destroyed every chance I had to be happy or get out of here. She laughed, that horrible laugh I hated so much. And I'll keep doing it, because you deserve it, because you're just like your father. Bad blood. That's when the doorbell rang. It was the Petersons again, probably hearing our argument through the thin walls. As always, my grandmother changed instantly. She put the knife on the counter, fixed her hair, rehearsed tears in her eyes, and went to answer. "Good evening, Miss Irene. We heard screaming. Is everything okay?" asked Mrs. Peterson, looking over my grandmother's shoulder, trying to see me inside the house. "Oh, Mrs. Peterson, good thing you came. I'm so scared. Matthew is having another one of his episodes. You know how Dr. Mendez explained yesterday?" Mr. Peterson appeared next to his wife, looking at me with a mix of pity and fear. "Do you want me to call someone, Miss Irene? The doctor, maybe?" No, I think it's passing. He gets like this sometimes, aggressive, then calms down. The appointment is only on Monday. We'll manage until then." I couldn't contain myself. "She's lying. She burned my grandfather's will. She's trying to have me committed to keep the house that's partially mine." The Peterson couple looked at me exactly as I expected, with that expression of someone who just confirmed their suspicions about my mental sanity. "See?" my grandmother whispered, feigning fear. "It's always like this now. These stories about wills, about the house." "Calm down, Matthew," said Mr. Peterson in a condescending tone. "Your grandmother just wants the best for you. Dr. Mendez will help." They stayed a few more minutes, keeping company with the poor, frightened lady, casting sideways glances at me, the disturbed young man. When they finally left, my grandmother closed the door and turned to me with a victorious smile. "See? This is how it will always be. No one will ever believe you." Something broke inside me at that moment. It wasn't just anger, it was a crystalline understanding that she was right. No one would ever believe me. The system that should protect me was completely manipulated against me. The rest of that night passed in a blur. We had dinner in silence. She watched television as if nothing had happened. I went to my room, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling, feeling something cold and definitive forming inside me. On Saturday, the next day, I kept quiet, submissive. She interpreted it as a defeat, as if I had finally accepted my fate. In reality, I was just observing, calculating, waiting. That night, we had another unexpected visit. This time it was Dr. Mendez himself, stopping by to see how things were. My grandmother received him effusively, as if he were a savior. "Doctor, good thing you came. Yesterday we had another episode. Matthew got aggressive, saying those things about the house, about me." The doctor nodded, looking at me with that clinical and distant expression. It's common to have an escalation of behaviors before starting treatment, as if the unconscious resisted the idea of being treated. He then addressed me directly for the first time. "Matthew, I'm here to help. On Monday we'll start a treatment that will make you feel much better." "What kind of treatment?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "We'll start with some medications to stabilize your mood. And maybe it's good for you to spend some time at the clinic under observation." "For how long?" He exchanged a look with my grandmother before answering. "The necessary time, a few weeks, maybe a few months. Depends on how you respond to treatment." After he left, my grandmother seemed exultant. "Monday all this ends, Matthew. You're going to the clinic, you'll receive the appropriate treatment, and I'll finally have peace. And the house?" She smiled. "The house will continue to be mine, as it always has been." Sunday dawned with a fine and constant rain, as if the sky itself cried for what was to come. I spent the whole day in an almost meditative state, thinking about all the possible alternatives, about all the paths my life could have taken if my father hadn't run away, if my mother hadn't died, if my grandmother were a different person. When night came, she was in excellent humor, almost humming while preparing dinner. She knew her victory was near. In less than 24 hours, I would be at Dr. Mendez's clinic, probably drugged into unconsciousness, and she would finally have what she always wanted, the house all to herself, without the inconvenience of the grandson who reminded her so much of the son who abandoned her. She insisted that we have dinner together in the living room, watching television as if we were a normal family, as if she wasn't planning to have me committed the next day. "Tomorrow we're leaving early," she said as we ate. "The appointment is at 9, but I want to arrive earlier to talk to the doctor." "To make sure he'll have me committed?" I asked, unable to contain the bitterness in my voice. "To make sure you'll receive the appropriate treatment," she corrected with that fake smile. "You need help, Matthew. These ideas about the house, about me wanting to hurt you, that's not normal." It was at that moment the doorbell rang. It was the Petersons, this time accompanied by 2 other neighbors. Apparently, they had decided to make a support visit on the eve of my appointment. My grandmother received them effusively, as always. They brought a cake, coffee, and that morbid curiosity, poorly disguised by people who take pleasure in observing other people's drama. "We came to give support, Miss Irene," said Mrs. Peterson. "We know it hasn't been easy." "God sends angels in the form of neighbors," my grandmother responded, pretending to wipe a tear. "I don't know what I'd do without you at this difficult time." For the next hour, I was forced to sit in the living room while they talked about me as if I weren't there, about how sad it was to see a young person with mental problems, about how my grandmother was an example of dedication, about how Dr. Mendez was an excellent professional who would certainly know how to help me. That's when Mr. Peterson, already on his 3rd cup of coffee, decided to speak directly to me. "So, Matthew, nervous about tomorrow's appointment?" Before I could answer, my grandmother intervened. "He's anxious, of course, but it'll be for his own good, right, Matthew?" All eyes turned to me, waiting for the obvious answer, the confirmation that I was just a disturbed young man, grateful for the medical intervention that was to come. "Of course," I answered mechanically, feeling something cold and definitive solidifying inside me. They continued for a while longer, until they finally left, but not before wishing good luck for tomorrow and reaffirming how my grandmother was an example for everyone. When she closed the door, she turned to me with that look of absolute triumph. "See how it is, Matthew? Everyone understands. Everyone knows you need help. Everyone supports me. Everyone believes your version," I corrected. "Which is the only one that matters," she completed, not even trying to hide her true nature anymore. "Now go to sleep. Tomorrow will be a big day." I went up to my room but couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about how my life had reached that point, about how every attempt to escape, every hope of freedom had been systematically destroyed by her. Around 2 in the morning, I quietly went down to the kitchen to drink water. The house was dark and silent. As I drank the water, looking out the window at the deserted street, I saw the Petersons' house still with a light on, probably talking about the drama they had witnessed, satisfied to have a story to tell. That's when I heard her voice behind me. "Can't sleep." She was standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing her old robe with her gray hair loose over her shoulders. For a moment, she looked like just a normal, elderly lady, not the person who had systematically destroyed my life. I didn't answer. "Just nervous about tomorrow." I didn't answer. I just kept looking out the window. "You know, Matthew, it didn't have to be this way," she said, approaching. "If you had been a good boy, accepted your place, it would never have reached this point. My place as your prisoner, as your slave. As my grandson," she exploded, the mask of calm falling for a moment. "As someone who should be grateful for everything I've done, do you think it was easy? Do you think I wanted this life taking care of the ungrateful one's son who abandoned me? Grandpa didn't abandon you. He died. He abandoned me by dying," she screamed, eyes wide with an ancient fury. "He left me alone to raise that useless father of yours, who grew up and did the same thing, abandoned me. And now you're just like them, wanting to leave me, wanting to take what's mine." At that moment, I understood everything. It wasn't just about the house or about me. It was about abandonment, about a woman who felt betrayed by all the men in her life and was determined not to allow it to happen again. "I'm not going to the clinic tomorrow," I said calmly. She laughed in that horrible way, throwing her head back. "Of course you are. You have no choice. Everything is already arranged. There's always a choice." She came closer, her face inches from mine. I could feel her hot breath, see every wrinkle of bitterness around her eyes. Not for you anymore. That's when she made the fatal mistake. In her absolute confidence, in the certainty of her victory, she said the words that sealed her fate. Tomorrow you're going to the clinic, and if it's up to me, you'll never get out. I'll tell Dr. Mendez you threatened me, that you tried to hurt me. I'll make sure they keep you sedated, isolated, and meanwhile, I'll live peacefully in my house, without having to look at your face that reminds me so much of your father. Something snapped inside me at that moment. It wasn't a snap. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was clarity, the crystalline understanding that there was no way out within the rules of the game she had created, that the system that should protect me was completely manipulated against me, that the next morning, my life as I knew it would end. What happened next was almost mechanical. My body moved before my mind even fully processed. The kitchen knife was on the counter, the same one she had used to cut vegetables at dinner. My hand reached for it. She saw the movement, but didn't react in time, too confident in her power over me. The first blow caught her in the chest. Her eyes widened, not with pain, but with surprise. Surprise that I had finally reacted, that I had finally broken the pattern of submission she had cultivated for years. "Matthew!" she gasped, stumbling backward. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The second blow hit her in the abdomen, the third in the neck. She fell on the kitchen floor. Eyes wide open, fixed on me, mouth open in a silent scream. I felt nothing while watching the blood spread across the white tile floor. There was no horror, no guilt, not even satisfaction, just relief, as if an enormous weight had been removed from my chest, allowing me to breathe completely for the first time in years. I stood there watching her until her eyes lost focus and her body stopped moving. Then calmly, I washed the knife, put it back in the drawer, and went up to take a shower. After the shower, I sat on the edge of the bed and called the police. "I need to report a homicide," I said calmly when they answered. "I killed my grandmother." They arrived in less than 10 minutes, sirens on, lights flashing, illuminating the entire street. The neighbors, including the Petersons, came out of their houses to watch the spectacle. I saw their shocked faces as the police put me in the patrol car in handcuffs. No one believed when I tried to explain. No one wanted to hear about years of psychological abuse, about the house, about the plan to have me committed. To the world, I was exactly what my grandmother had painted. A disturbed teenager who attacked a poor elderly lady. Dr. Mendez testified at my trial, talking about my persecutory delusions, about how I fabricated stories about abuse to justify violent thoughts. The neighbors testified about how my grandmother was dedicated and patient with me, about how I was increasingly unstable. Because I was a minor at the time of the crime, I was sent to juvenile detention instead of prison. 3 years I spent in a kind of limbo, neither free nor completely imprisoned, receiving the help everyone insisted I needed. Ironic, isn't it? She wanted to have me committed, medicate me into submission. In the end, she got exactly that, even dead. Today is my first day of freedom after 3 years in juvie. I'm officially 18 years old, I'm legally an adult, and technically I've served my time. The irony doesn't escape me. If I had waited just a few more months, I would have reached adulthood and maybe found a legal way out of my situation. But the truth is, there was no guarantee whatsoever. The documents had been destroyed. The doctor was already convinced of my mental instability. The neighbors had already bought her narrative. And that night, when she revealed her true intentions to keep me committed indefinitely, the last door closed. I'm not trying to justify what I did. Taking a life is something I carry with me every day, a weight that never completely disappears. The psychologists at juvie called it processing trauma, as if it were something that could be solved with a few therapy sessions and medications. During my time there, I had access to social workers, lawyers, people who theoretically were there to help me. I tried again to tell my story, to show the other side. Some even seemed to consider the possibility that I wasn't simply a violent teenager who attacked his grandmother for no reason. One social worker in particular, Dr. Camille, was the first person in years to really listen to me. She investigated my school history, talked to teachers, found that history teacher who had noticed signs of abuse. Together, they began to unravel the web of manipulation my grandmother had created. It didn't change my sentence. Of course, what I did was still wrong by law, regardless of circumstances, but it changed how I was treated in the system. Instead of being seen just as a lost cause, a potential future criminal, I began to be treated as someone who had also been a victim. The house, as I found out later, ended up being sold to pay debts my grandmother had accumulated. Gambling debts, I discovered surprised. Apparently, her obsession with control didn't extend to her own finances. Or maybe it was just another form of self-deception, of escaping the reality she herself had created. Nothing was left for me, nor should there be. I don't want anything that comes from that house, from that life. The only legacy I carry from there are the emotional scars and the awareness of what I did. Now sitting in this empty park, watching people pass by in a hurry, I wonder, what will I do with this newly acquired freedom? I have no family. I have no house. I don't have much money beyond what I earned from jobs inside juvie. I have some contacts from NGOs that work with former inmates, people who can help me find a place to stay, maybe a job. There are moments when I wonder what my life would have been like if my father hadn't run away, if my mother hadn't died, if my grandmother had been a different person, if I had been a different person. Would I have found another way out? Would I have endured until I turned 18 and escaped legally? I don't know. I'll never know. What I do know is that that night in the kitchen changed everything forever. I didn't just take a life. I took any chance of a different resolution, of a less tragic ending to our dysfunctional story. Some of the other young people in juvie talked about their crimes with a kind of distorted pride, as if there was something admirable in their violence. I never understood that. There's nothing admirable in what I did. It was an act of desperation, born of fear and lack of alternatives, or at least my inability to see alternatives at that moment. The psychologist said I suffered from tunnel vision, a mental state where we can only see one possible path forward, where all other options disappear and only one action remains, however extreme it may be. Maybe they're right, or maybe it's just a more scientific way of saying I was cornered. The truth is, I'll never know if there was another path. If I had endured a little longer, sought help elsewhere, found someone who believed in me, these questions haunt me, especially on the nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, seeing her face in my dreams. It's been 3 years, but the blood on my hands never seems to completely wash away. Not physically, of course. Physically, it was easy to clean. It's the metaphorical weight that remains, the stain that no time in juvie, no therapy, no medication can completely remove. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not seeking forgiveness. What I did was wrong, regardless of circumstances. A life was taken by my hands, and that's something I have to carry. What I'm looking for now is some kind of new beginning, a chance to build something different, something that isn't defined only by my worst moment, by my worst decision. The psychologists at juvie said I had potential, that I was intelligent, articulate, capable of reflection, that I could have a future despite my past. On my best days, I almost believe it. During these 3 years, I completed my studies, got my high school diploma. I discovered I like writing, that words help me organize the chaos inside my mind. I started putting my story on paper, not to justify, but to understand, to try to make some sense of what happened. One of the counselors suggested that I could use this experience one day to help other young people in similar situations. Your pain can have purpose, he said. I don't know if I completely believe that, but it's a thought I cling to on the hardest days. Ironically, it was in juvie that I experienced for the first time what seemed like a functional family. We weren't relatives, of course. We were just broken young people, brought together by the system, supervised by professionals who were paid to care for us. But there were moments during basketball games in the yard or evening group sessions when I felt something like belonging, something I had never felt in my grandmother's house. I learned about healthy boundaries, about how to express anger without violence, about how to recognize manipulation and abuse. I learned about intergenerational patterns of trauma, how my grandmother probably was also a victim at some point, how she repeated with my father what they did to her, how my father maybe ran away to escape only to leave me trapped in the same cycle. Understanding isn't forgiving, but it helps to contextualize. It helps to see that we weren't just individual monsters acting in a vacuum, but damaged people trapped in a complex web of pain that came from long before us. I visited her grave once, in the 2nd year of my detention. It was part of the therapeutic program. Confront what I did, seek some kind of closure. I stood there looking at the simple headstone, feeling a confused mixture of emotions. I couldn't cry or ask for forgiveness. I just stood there in silence, thinking about everything that could have been different. On the way back, we passed by the old house. New residents, new curtains in the windows, a children's swing in the yard. Lives that moved on without any awareness of the tragedy that happened within those walls. I felt something strange seeing this. Not exactly envy or resentment, maybe just the understanding of how life is simultaneous. For some an end, for others a beginning. Everything happening at the same time. The Petersons still lived there. I saw Mr. Peterson mowing the lawn when we passed. He didn't recognize me or pretended not to recognize me. Better that way. I have nothing to say to them nor they to me. We're just secondary characters in each other's stories. Now today, my first day out, I feel displaced. The world continued while I was away. New technologies, new buildings, new slang. People walk hurriedly, absorbed in their everyday problems, oblivious to the internal drama of an ex-inmate trying to readjust. I received a small aid to start over. Money enough for a few weeks in a boarding house, for basic clothes, for documents. I have a job interview next week at a print shop that hires former inmates as part of a reintegration program. It's not much, but it's a start, a different starting point than I had before. The hardest thing to explain to people, to therapists, to other inmates, to anyone who asks, is that I don't feel simple and direct regret. What I feel is more complex. I deeply regret that a life was lost. I regret that things reached that extreme point. I regret not finding another way out, but I can't feel that kind of regret people expect. That, if I could go back, I would do differently. Because the truth is that at that specific moment, with the information I had, with the mental state I was in, I don't see how I could have acted differently. It was like being in a burning building, with all exits blocked and the only option being to jump out the window. The psychologists call this tunnel cognition. When we're in a state of extreme threat, our brain severely limits the options we can perceive. It's a survival mechanism, simplify to act quickly. The problem is that sometimes the remaining options are all terrible. I'm working to develop a broader vision now, to recognize alternatives, to see exits where before I only saw walls. It's a slow, difficult process, full of relapses and moments of doubt. Some days are better than others. Today, sitting in this empty park with the afternoon sun hitting my face, I feel something like hope. Not that naive hope of childhood, but something more tempered, more realistic. The understanding that despite everything, I'm still here, I'm still breathing, I still have choices ahead of me, different from the ones I had before. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll be able to build a life that's worthwhile, that somehow redeems what happened. I don't know if I'll ever look in the mirror without seeing the reflection of that night in the kitchen. But I know I'm going to try. That each day is a new choice, a new chance to be something beyond my worst moment. If you've watched this far, thank you for hearing my story. I'm not asking for understanding or forgiveness, just that you consider how easy it is to judge from the outside without ever having been inside. How easy it is to say what someone should have done without ever having faced their exact circumstances. I'm not saying what I did was right. I'm just saying that sometimes the line between victim and perpetrator is thinner than we'd like to believe. That we're all capable of terrible acts under terrible circumstances, and that no one is as far from that limit as they imagine. Now I need to go. The shelter where I'm staying closes its doors at 6, and I still have a long way ahead. Literally and figuratively. Until any day, maybe. Thanks for witnessing. Before you go, please leave a like on this video, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like mine reach others who might need to hear them.